Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts on the internet, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1392 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The amateur radio community rallies around Hurricane Melissa, providing critical ground truth observations as well as passing health and welfare traffic. The League calls on the General Mobile Radio Service operators to help pass the Emergency Preparedness Act now before Congress. The ARRL November sweepstakes is about to get underway. The 2026 ARRL Foundation Scholarship Program is now accepting applications. The Livonia Amateur Radio Club will commemorate the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the USS Edmund Fitzgerald. The newly elected president of AMSAT outlines the organization's future directions. A century of broadcast radio is celebrated by amateurs in Latvia. An amateur radio receiver reveals unsecured transmissions and privacy issues coming from supposedly secure satellites. Special event operators remember the War of the Worlds, Martian invasion, and operate from Grover's Mill, New Jersey. AMSAT is now offering students of any age free membership subscriptions. And is AMSAT Oscar 7 the oldest amateur radio satellite in orbit? The answer to that question, and a lot more, is straight ahead in today's edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Ben Shop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will tell us about going around in circles one way, or a brief look at RF circulators. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to the year 1923, where amateurs were making transoceanic contacts and experimenting with the shorter wavelengths. This is part one of a two-part episode entitled The Fourth Time's the Charm. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio in a nondescript building in blustery Albany, New York, I'm George, W2XBS.
And this week, reporting from my ham shack in Cortlandville, New York, where I finally got the coax to my 80-meter dipole fixed after running it over with the lawnmower. It was in many, many pieces, I tell you. I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau in Middle Tennessee, where we eagerly await the arrival of little ghouls and goblins, this is Al Shepard, WK8W.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where I think I finally got rid of that hideous hum that was in the background, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
Coming to you from a rather nippy but still sunny Space Coast in Florida, I'm Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from our Troy, New York news bureau, it's Halloween. Boo, was that scary? I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our headquarters studios here in frosty Naugatuck, Connecticut, where we had our very first frost of the season last night, I'm Steve, K1FRC.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the autumn leaves have pretty much left, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where autumn is now showing her colors, can winter be far behind? I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off our news this week is, of course, the amateur radio coverage of Hurricane Melissa. This past week, Hurricane Melissa, a Category 5 storm, took its time and toll as it moved over Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, and is now headed towards Bermuda. Here with more details on the storm is John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
Melissa is one of the most powerful Caribbean storms in recorded history. At noon on Thursday, the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida, forecasted Melissa, now a Category 2 storm again, will move just west of Bermuda. But Bermuda will be on the stronger right-hand side and will still have to deal with some of these stronger impacts later in the day. Amateur radio operators from around the world have been monitoring the Melissa path and over the last 4 days have been working with the weather nets, passing and relaying critical information. The Hurricane Watch Net will activate again Thursday afternoon, October 30th at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on 20 meters and 40 meters. The VoIP Hurricane Net is likely to activate again also at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Thursday for Hurricane Melissa and its passage by Bermuda. Radio Amateurs of Canada, RAC, has been actively monitoring Hurricane Melissa. RAC urges all Canadian amateur radio operators to protect the frequencies currently being utilized for disaster response on HF bands. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
ARRL will continue to publish regular reports from radio amateurs supporting these operations.
ARRL has called on General Mobile Radio Service, or GMRS operators, to join its grassroots campaign to pass the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act. In an open letter to the GMRS community, ARRL says, even though you may not be an FCC-licensed amateur radio operator, as an FCC-licensed GMRS operator, you can help by sending a letter to each of your congressional representatives and your senators. GMRS users should go to www.arrl.org/HOA and select the GMRS Users button to create their letters. The letters will be automatically generated when they enter their FCC-issued GMRS call sign.
The CW weekend of the ARRL November Sweepstakes is November 1st through the 3rd, 2025. It runs from 2100 UTC Saturday through 2:59 UTC Monday. ARRL Sweepstakes is the oldest domestic contest, beginning in 1930, with competition at the individual, multi-operator, and school club levels. In this contest, multipliers are the 85 ARRL and RAC sections. Each may be contacted once as a multiplier in the contest, regardless of band. There are no changes to sweepstakes multipliers for 2025. The 2024 multiplier list will be used for all section-based contests for the remainder of 2025. Canadian stations located in Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut should continue to send TER territories as their section. The three Canadian territories, Yukon, Northwest, and Nunavut, are combined into a singular territories, or TER multiplier. The exchange may be daunting for first-timers, but it's familiar to those who've operated in this contest before. Contacts may be made on 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters. But because multipliers may be worked only once, activity tends to cluster on the bands that are open and populated. See the full rules and additional information at www.arrl.org/sweepstakes.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The ARRL's nationwide grassroots campaign aimed at securing the passage of federal legislation that would grant amateur radio operators the right to install antennas on their property has been active now for just over a month. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, has more from League headquarters.
The campaign, announced in the ARRL membership bulletin on September 17, 2025, follows the reintroduction of the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act in February of 2025. The bipartisan bills are designed to prevent restrictive homeowners association HOA rules that currently prohibit or severely limit the installation of amateur radio antennas, even when such antennas are hidden in trees, placed in attics, mounted on vehicles, or look like flagpoles. This legislation is about restoring equal rights to licensed amateur radio operators, said ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR. These restrictions hinder not only the enjoyment of amateur radio, but also its vital role in emergency communication during disasters. To advance the legislation, ARRL is calling on its members and all licensees of the U.S. Amateur Radio Service to take action by sending letters to their congressional representatives. That process has been made easy through a dedicated online tool that hams can use to easily generate and submit pre-drafted letters with just a few clicks. Every letter matters, and your representatives and senators need to know that the passage of this legislation is important to you. ARRL is also encouraging radio clubs to provide letters of support and is urging each club officer to sign the letters. There are instructions for clubs on how to complete the letters and a sample letter for clubs, DXOCX, that should be customized with their information. All of the information to help pass the bill can be found at arrl.org, current legislation. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
General mobile radio service users can also now send in letters. All of the information to help pass the bill can be found at arrl.org/current legislation. The bipartisan bills are H.R. 1094 in the House and S. 459 in the Senate.
The ARRL Foundation Scholarship Program has opened the application window for its 2026 scholarship. The applications will be accepted through December 30, 2025 at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Students are encouraged to apply for more than 170 scholarships, ranging from $500 to $25,000. All applicants must be active FCC-licensed amateur radio operators. The scholarships were established by generous donors and managed by the ARRL Foundation as a means to inspire youth to explore amateur radio and to pursue higher education and related career paths, especially in wireless communication. In 2025, the ARRL Foundation awarded 170 awards, totaling $800,000. For more information and the online application, go to www.arrl.org, Scholarship Program.
On November 2nd through the 15th, 2025, in Livonia, Michigan, the Livonia Amateur Radio Club will commemorate the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. 50 Novembers ago, a storm stirred over Lake Superior, and the USS Edmund Fitzgerald, a ship with 29 men aboard, was swallowed up by the raging water. That tragedy in the American Midwest claimed the lives of the entire crew. They share their final resting place with the doomed iron ore carrier. These men are not buried and forgotten, however. Their friends, relatives, and former neighbors are among those who participate every year in an on-air tribute organized by the Stillwater Amateur Radio Association. Hams will be calling QRZ as W0JH from November 7th through to the anniversary date of the ship's sinking, November 10th. Special Events Chair and past President Dave Glass, W0OXB, said that connections to this ship have emerged almost every year for the 2 decades of this event. A distant cousin of club member Curtis Letch, KF0PSC, was among the fatalities. Blaine H. Wilhelm was 52 and the ship's oiler. Dave went on to say that over 2 decades of operating our special event, we've made contact with 1,000 hams average per year worldwide, mostly through North America. There's often someone who tells us a connection they've had with one of the lost crewmen. The hams will operate from Split Rock Lighthouse State Park. The ship had passed that lighthouse on the day it made its final trip. On Saturday, November 8th from 15:30 to 20:30 UTC, W8F will operate from the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, Belle Isle Park in Detroit, Michigan. E-certificates will be available. Visit the club's website for more information. Special Events Station W8F will operate on 14.260, 7.260, 7.050 and 14.050 MHz from 0000 Zulu through 2359 Zulu. The Edmund Fitzgerald was also the inspiration for Gordon Lightfoot's hit song The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1976, which helped make it the most famous shipwreck in the Great Lakes.
Amateur Radio Digital Communications has a mission to support the tinkerers, the dreamers, and the builders who keep ham radio strong. They recently issued a reminder that they are actively looking for applicants. Grants are available from Amateur Radio Digital Communications, which is giving top priority to projects in one of several areas, supporting satellite technology for ham analog and digital communications, developing hands-on open source and educational materials and projects for learners in schools and clubs, and delving into open source hardware and software systems that include SDRs, new modulation techniques, and codec technologies. ARDC said that projects outside these areas would also be welcome to apply, but that these areas are closest to the core of the organization's goal of promoting the freedom to tinker, build, communicate, and openly share information. Details can be found on the ARDC website.
At the annual general meeting of AMSAT members held as part of the AMSAT Symposium in Phoenix, Arizona last weekend, newly elected AMSAT President Drew Glassbrenner, KO4MA, outlined some future directions for the organization. Noting that membership in organizations and voluntary associations of all types has been declining across the board in all areas of society, Glassbrenner suggested a two-pronged approach. First, reduce the cost per member. AMSAT has already made major steps in that direction by closing the office and changing to an all-volunteer administration, and also by changing the AMSAT Journal from print to a digital publication. The organization should seek more opportunities to economize. Second, increase membership by creating a strategy to actively seek and invite new hams. The board has just approved a free student membership to bring young hams into the organization. Reinstating a college activity night on the satellites, an AMSAT YouthNet, and publicizing youth satellite activities are priorities. Another possibility might be a two-tiered membership structure with a low-fee introductory membership. Glassbrenner also noted that government budget cuts have caused NASA to eliminate the CubeSat Launch Initiative program, which provided free launch opportunities to educational projects. AMSAT has benefited from the CubeSat Launch Initiative program, but has also purchased commercial launches in the past. He indicated that AMSAT should not wait to see if CSLI is reinstated or replaced with a similar program, but that the organization should move forward to fund commercial launches for Golf T and Fox Plus satellites that are nearing readiness in coming months. Another challenge facing AMSAT is that it is becoming increasingly difficult to operate in low Earth orbit. While orbital debris regulations forbid launches to higher orbits without meeting stringent technical requirements for deorbiting, re-entry devices are largely unavailable or unproven. The Golf program is meant to address this, but launches to higher orbits are also difficult to find. Future rules may mandate propulsion for collision avoidance in low Earth orbit. A strategy to meet these orbital challenges is to focus on developing amateur radio payloads that can fly on other satellites. The Italian Green Cube satellite, IO-117, was an example. To take advantage of these opportunities, AMSAT engineers must focus on developing payloads as a series rather than as single projects, so that units are on the shelf and available on short notice. The SDR Gen 2 transmitter board, an updated version of the units flown on HuskySat and MESAT-1, is a major step in this direction, as is the updated PacSat board under development. The Golf and Fox Plus programs are also being crafted to create satellites in a series with iterative improvements and an up-tempo launch cadence. Finally, Glassbrenner called for strengthening international collaboration with other AMSAT organizations around the world, as well as establishing mechanisms for strategic planning at the board of directors level. His address was received enthusiastically by those in attendance.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
At its annual meeting in Phoenix, Arizona, the AMSAT Board of Directors elected Drew Glassbrenner, Kilo Oscar 4, Mike Alpha, President. Glassbrenner succeeds Robert Bankston, Kilo Echo 4, Alpha Lima, who had served as AMSAT's president since 2020 and earlier this year announced his intention to step down. Glassbrenner had previously served as AMSAT's vice president of operations since 2006 and as director for many years. As an enthusiastic operator, Glassbrenner earned Satellite DXCC, worked all states, AMSAT Gridmaster, and has over 2,100 VUCC satellite grids. He's also a proud father of 2 young hams, Kilo Oscar 4, Uniform Yankee Echo, and Kilo Quebec 4, Sierra Juliet Mike. Additionally, Glassbrenner serves as a member of the International Amateur Radio Union Satellites Frequency Coordination Panel and advises university CubeSat teams on frequency coordination and licensing issues. The Board of Directors also elected the following officers for the next year. Executive Vice President, Paul Stotzer, November 8, Hotel Mike. Vice President, Operations, Mark Hammond, November 8, Mike Hotel. Vice President, Engineering, Jerry Buxton, November 0, Juliet Yankee. Treasurer, Steve Belter, November 9, India Papa. Secretary, Doug Tabor, November 6, Uniform Alpha. Additionally, the President appointed the following officers. Vice President, Educational Relations, Alan Johnson, Kilo Uniform 2 Yankee. Vice President, Development, Frank Karnauskas, November 1, Uniform Whiskey.
Radio is precious to Orson Welles, the American writer, actor, magician, and filmmaker, who is most prominently celebrated at this time of the year for War of the Worlds, his 1938 science fiction broadcast depicting a Martian invasion, a drama so realistic that it incited panic in listeners. War of the Worlds was back on the radio recently, but this time it was amateur radio. The fictional Martians may not have had their antennas tuned, but members of the Delaware Valley Radio Association did as 16 operators called CQ for several hours in a public park in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, the site where the original broadcast radio drama played out in 1938. This was the club's 4th year hosting the event as station W0W, and it was timed to coincide with the original late October airing. There is a monument in the park honoring that broadcast, which put Grover's Mill on the map. But the ham's activation in the park may have left a lasting impression too. Unlike the invading Martians, the visitors here came in peace. Cyclists participating in the township's Martian bike ride and other members of the public stopped by to get a close-up look at what amateur radio is all about. One young person even got on the air and logged one of the 159 QSOs that were made according to Martin Crabtree, W3PR. Anyone saying, "Take me to your leader," would have been introduced, of course, to club president Martin. That's Martin, not Martian, who was outfitted appropriately in a foil-covered fedora. Other hams wore antennae, but in this case, none of them were tuned for any transmissions except perhaps those from Mars.
We look at the question, is low Earth orbit getting too crowded? Hundreds of satellites may soon be flying in orbital regions that are already too packed to allow safe and long-term operations, a new study suggests. The study found that while in 2019 only 0.2% of satellites in Earth orbit were forced to perform more than 10 collision avoidance maneuvers per month, that percentage has risen 7-fold by 2025 to 1.4%. That number might still seem low, but it means that some 340 satellites spend a lot of time dodging debris and other spacecraft. Moreover, the satellite population is set to keep growing. while in 2019, about 13,700 objects, including space junk, zoomed around the planet in low Earth orbit at altitudes below 2,000 kilometers. That number has since risen to 24,185 objects in 2025, an increase of 76%, according to this study. By the end of this decade, some 70,000 satellites may reside in low Earth orbit, according to the industry growth predictions, representing a more than 5-fold increase compared to the 2019 situation. The study, conducted by William E. Parker, Maya Harris, Giovanni Lavazzi, and Richard Linares of the Department of Aeronautics and Astronomics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was published September 26th in the journal Acta Astronautica. The research was sponsored by the Department of the Air Force Artificial Intelligence Accelerator. The authors selected 10 collision avoidance maneuvers per month as a threshold at which satellite operations may become too complicated to be beneficial. Different operators chose a different threshold to perform collision avoidance maneuvers. Every time two objects came within less than 200 meters of each other, the researchers noted the event as requiring a collision avoidance maneuver. NASA spacecraft mostly maneuver when the collision risk is greater than 1 in 10,000. SpaceX, the world's biggest satellite operator, with its Starlink broadband mega constellation, is more cautious, using its autonomous space dodging system to avoid an object posing a risk greater than 1 in 3.3 million. Frequent maneuvers present a disruption to operation that some satellite handlers are better able to absorb than others.
The broadcasts in the amateur radio worlds have often overlapped, especially sharing many of the same people behind the microphone or behind the scenes. In Latvia, hams are taking part in a celebration that marks 100 years of that nation's first radio station. The hams, who were calling CQ as Yankee Lima 100 Lima Romeo until November 2nd, are sharing the story of Rigas Radiofons, which went on the air in 1925 with a 2-kilowatt transmitter, 2 45-meter high antenna towers, and equipment purchased from France. From its studio inside a post office building in Riga City, the state-owned station began its life on the air with a 2-hour broadcast that included the Puccini opera, Madame Butterfly, and a speech by Minister of Transport J. Palux. The evolution of radio broadcasting in Latvia is closely tied to that of amateur radio there. When the Latvian Radio Society helped create the Radio Subscribers Law, they created a category for radio experimenters who eventually became the nation's hams. From the start, hams were big supporters of the newly created broadcast station. In fact, by 1926, a spare transmitter at the station was being used for ham radio communications. The relationship remains strong to this day, and many amateur radio operators in Latvia are also broadcast radio professionals.
Here's a chance to see your club in QST. ARRL has made 2026 the Year of the Club, a year-long celebration of ham radio clubs and everything they do for amateur radio. And just one way of honoring various clubs, QST will feature club photos in every 2026 issue. If the club wants to take a shot at being highlighted in the pages of QST, here's what you do. Get your club members together looking their best. If you have a club t-shirt or ARRL shirt, this is a perfect occasion for wearing them. Consider posing with your club's sign and banner. Take high-resolution images. If you're taking photos with a phone camera, please make sure it's set for highest quality. Also take photos in the horizontal and vertical orientations, and please do not crop or otherwise edit those photos. Type up the names and call signs of any hams that are pictured, the name and call sign, if applicable, of the person who took the photos, and the full name and call sign of the club. And then send the information along with one of the vertical and one of the horizontal photos to qst@arrl.org. And remember to read QST each month in 2026 to see if your club has been featured.
At its annual meeting in Phoenix, Arizona, the AMSAT Board of Directors unanimously voted to offer student memberships at no cost. Free student memberships are offered for individuals under the age of 25 enrolled in an educational program from primary school through a master's degree. The benefits of an AMSAT student membership include a 1-year-long digital subscription to the AMSAT Journal and discounted prices on certain items in the AMSAT store. Interested students may sign up for their no-cost membership at launch.amsat.org www.ncast.com/membership.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. If I sound a little froggy tonight, it's because I have a sore throat, which I would attribute to allergies, so hopefully it'll clear up. The word for this week is beverage antenna. A beverage antenna is a long, low wire, often hundreds of meters long, that lies close to the ground and is used to receive radio signals. It's known for its excellent directional properties and low noise, making it ideal for weak signal reception on lower frequencies. The antenna consists of a single wire, often 1 to 2 meters above ground, sometimes on the ground, a resistor used as a terminator at the far end, and a feed line, usually coax cable, at the near end to connect to the receiver. It receives best from the direction of the terminated end. The termination absorbs signals from the opposite direction, giving the antenna its directionality. The advantages of a beverage are very low noise compared to verticals or dipole antennas, excellent directivity used for rejecting unwanted signals, and it is simple and inexpensive to build. The disadvantage is that it requires a lot of space, works best for reception, not transmission, and it typically needs a good ground system or ground rods. This antenna was named after Harold Beveridge, who invented it around 1921 while working for AT&T on transatlantic radio reception. Now, I will tell you the part about having it be hundreds of meters long isn't always correct. I have one that's about 400 feet long, and it's just literally laying in the grass, terminated on one end, and I use it on 160, and it actually does improve the reception. And as 160 expert and my friend Joe, WAGEX, would say, 50 feet will get you started, and 100 would be better than 50, and 200 would be better than 100, etc. So if you have any space at all, it's worth trying out. And if you listen to the end of the episode tonight, you will have an opportunity to get details on how to build this and a few other 160-meter antennas. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Let's start off with a Somalia update, 6 Oscar 3 Tango. Quote, "Good morning, everyone. We'd like to thank you all for the affection and patience you've shown towards our 6 Oscar operation. Despite the high noise level, we're moving forward with great personal satisfaction, sometimes at the expense of the usual CW single sideband modes, but often it's a necessary choice. We're enjoying good openings on the 6 meters band toward Europe, around 1100 GMT, with a few shorter ones toward Asia as well. In the afternoon, around 1500 GMT, the 6-meter band will open again. We've been transmitting for the second night in a row on 80 meters and have logged several nice QSOs. In the coming days, we will likely make some tests on 160 meters, although we don't have any expectations for success there, but we'll give it a try. Finally, we've been receiving many emails about call corrections and typing errors. Our apologies, but this is not the right time. All such requests will be handled once we're back home. And I happened to be around the other night, and I heard them come up and was able to work them right away. Kind of forgot they were on, so I got lucky. I'll take it, but I did get lucky. The Papa Juliet 6 Yankee adventure is now QRT. After an amazing weekend participating in the CQ Worldwide Single Sideband 2025 contest, the PJ6 Yankee adventure is coming to a close. Our young operator team achieved an incredible milestone, over 55,000 QSOs. Quote, "On behalf of the PJ6 Yankee 2025 team, I would like to thank all of you who took the time to work us," said Greg, W6IZT. "A special thanks goes out to our sponsors and supporters. This expedition would not have been possible without your generous help and encouragement," end quote. And if you got to hear them, they did a fabulous job. They were all over the place and easy to work. So here's an update from 5 Radio, which is Madagascar. The Italian DXpedition team, led by Silvano, Italy 2 Yankee Sierra Bravo, announce a new activity from Madagascar until November 12th is 5 Radio 8 Tango Tango, utilizing CW, sideband, and RTTY, and is FR8XX on FT8. A team will be operating with 4 stations from 160 to 6 meters, and you can QSL Madagascar via I2YSB. Sierra Leone. The X3 Charlie 2 Mike Delta team managed to plan another de-expedition as 9 Lima 8 Mike Delta until November 10th. The team will be active as 9 Lima 8 Mike Delta from 160 through 6 meters using CW, sideband, and RTTY, and you can QSL 9 Lima 8 MD to IK2 VUC. More new activity, Burundi 9 uniform. Members of the Russian DX team, with Vasily R7AL as team leader, will be active as 9 Uniform 1 Radio United until November 20th. The plan is to be active with 7 stations from 160 to 6 meters using high power, and you can QSL via club log. And again, that's 9 Uniform 1 Radio United. So here's something from Kosovo, Zulu 6. Look for S58MU and S50X as Zulu 66 India Papa Alpha until November 3rd. They will be operating from 160 through 10 meters, and you can QSL the Kosovo operation to Sugar 58 Mike Uniform. And finally, we have an update on VU4 Andaman Island. The World De-Expedition team will be QRV until November 7th from 3 POTA locations. The team will be QRV with 5 stations 24/7. Quote, needless to say, the support of the corporate and private sponsors are essential to make this de-expedition a success. The team's priority will be to make as many QSOs as possible and offer the highest exposure as possible for our sponsors. Corporate or club sponsors donating $1,000 or more in cash or equipment will be recognized on our QSL cards and website. All private sponsors and Patreons will be listed on the website, end quote. The DX Mentor podcast YouTube channel features a new episode this coming weekend. It's about the YASME Foundation and the great contributions of the famous Ward Silver N0AX. Check it out on YouTube and let me know what you think. He is really an unbelievable off-scale guy and just a great guy to talk to. If you want to follow all the latest DX podcast and YouTube releases, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to date on all of the DX activities. So I have a quick contest update. I know that the ARL contest sheet is read elsewhere in the podcast, and the contests that I mention are sometimes redundant. However, there are a few contests that I have found to be especially useful for DXers who are trying to fill band slots or work an all-time new one. Here's a contest that you may want to check out if you are a 160-meter operator. It is the RAF 160-meter contest. It's the third full weekend in November, which would be the 15th and 16th, and it runs on Saturday 1700 Zulu until Sunday at 0100 Zulu, again the 15th and the 16th. The frequency you should be looking for is 1810 to 1850 kilohertz CW only. The exchange is RST plus serial number. I will be participating, but I'm not sure how I will do. If you would like a copy of the special Southwest Ohio DX Association October newsletter that has over 100 pages of articles about 160 meters, just drop me a line at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I will send it to you. I hope you'll find it helpful. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
The United States Air Force Military Auxiliary Radio System will hold its 77th annual special event from 0001 UTC November 8th through 2359 UTC November 11th, 2025. Stations Whiskey 1 Alpha, Whiskey 1 Echo, Whiskey 1 Charlie, and Whiskey 1 Whiskey will be on the air from Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, in the general and technician portions of 80 through 10 meters, excluding 60 meters, using voice, CW, and digital FT8. All amateur radio operators are invited to participate in the event. There will not be any QSL cards issued, but a downloadable certificate will be available sometime in mid-December. Visit Air Force Military Auxiliary Radio System.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 45th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks go out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the presentation of these segments. Now join us as we bring you this, the next chapter of Ham Radio History. The fourth time's the charm. After the initial thrill of being the first to hear transatlantic signals, Paul Godley's next thought was of making contact and a helpless frustration at not having equipment to transmit a reply. And now, emboldened by the successful second set of transatlantic tests in December 1922, many amateurs were talking about the possibility of a first two-way contact across the ocean. In fact, in early 1923, U.S. hams were already informally running two-way tests with Leon Deloy, French 8AB, one of the European stations most widely copied in North America last time, without success, but with both sides hearing each other at different times. Deloy had also started a series of his own tests every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, transmitting between 0500 and 0530 GMT, then listening for 30 minutes. Later in the year, he reported experimenting all the way down to 45 meters. Deloy was hearing signals in Nice, sent by an experimental station in Paris, 435 miles away, in broad daylight, with signals readable 16 feet from the phones, no QSS, and very little QRN. He believed that signals of equal power at 200 meters or higher would not have been readable at all. It was just a hint of things to come. In the U.S., several individual amateurs had been testing as well, exploring shorter wavelengths in a sort of inverted mountain climbing procedure. The explorers would first rendezvous at base camp at 200 meters and then tentatively descend lower in stages. Aside from the freedom from QRM, the short wavelengths were mostly empty except for commercial harmonics. They all found that the strongest signals came through below 170 meters. To stimulate more such exploration, the ARRL Operating Department announced a 100-meter CQ party for the nights of 24 and 25 March 1923 from 10:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. Eastern Time, with 10 minutes of transmitting time allotted to each U.S. district plus Canada. Trying to encourage efficient operation, ARRL Traffic Manager Fred Schnell warned, "Don't call CQ 185 times and sign once. No one is going to camp on your wave forever. Keep signing at intervals. Everybody is invited to try both sending and listening and to send the logs to the QST shop. They must be clean logs, not logs written on scrap paper or in the middle of a letter." Hams turned out enthusiastically. Logs arrived at headquarters from all districts except the 7th, as recorded in a special edition of the Calls Heard section of QST, in which the editor reported that the gang is absolutely nuts about short waves. All of the calls reported were heard between 80 and 190 meters. Every effort was made to eliminate harmonics of signals at 200 meters or higher that could have been mistaken for shortwave signals, presumably so that only those who were actually taking part of the test would be credited with being heard. All of these experiences fed enthusiasm as hams prepared for the fourth transatlantic tests, which were run from 21 December 1923 through 10 January 1924. As in the previous test, selected stations in Britain and France would be allocated specific times to transmit code words. But this test would also differ in its predecessors in one significant way. Complete QSOs would be their ultimate goal. Even the name of the event changed. The two-way transatlantic test would be open to everybody, a free-for-all, announced ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner, meaning that, in addition to the allocated stations, everyone else would get a chance to participate. Several things were coming together to favor success this time. The government now mandated evening quiet hours, a regulation put in place just a few months earlier. Europe would again transmit, and no North American stations were allocated transmit times until 11 January, when the two-way attempts would start. Any North American station caught transmitting during the quiet period would be disqualified from all awards. The only exception would be in case of emergency. Each night, the test would be conducted between 0100 and 0600 GMT. During the first 2 hours, any amateur in Europe could transmit between 180 and 220 meters. Then from 0300 to 0600, individual transmitters would send their assigned code words, with British and French amateurs transmitting on alternate nights. Finally, on 11 January, everyone was to attempt two-way contacts, QSOs. QSD offered a genuine Brown Derby to the first American to make contact, and a collection of prizes worth $3,600, the equivalent to nearly $50,000 in 2013, was donated by various companies to recognize the best reception records. A Grebe 4-tube 250-watt transmitter was the top prize and would be awarded to the amateur who reported the largest total station miles, meaning the sum of all distances of all the stations logged, each one counting only once. In the case of code word stations, that bit of information must be correctly copied and reported as well. Winning the top prize excluded an entrant from winning any of the other prizes. Next, after the Grebe, were 5 more award groups designated A through E. Within each group, the top 5 places carried awards of equipment ranging in value from $200 for first place down to $20 for fifth. The Group A award was for the greatest distance of any single reception. B and C were for the greatest station miles with France or Britain, respectively, on any given night, and D and E were for the greatest station miles with France or Britain over the duration of the tests. Each amateur would be eligible to receive only one award. As Schnell put it, it is to be understood that this is purely a sporting event, and there is no excuse for anybody to be unreasonable and expect to grab everything in sight. Logs should be complete and contain at least call sign, code word, if any, date, time, and wavelength for each reception, and each entrant should indicate in which group they were competing. The logs would be due at HQ no later than 25 January, a mere 2 weeks after the end of the tests. With the exception of the equipment awards, the overall structure of the test was beginning to look a lot like today's on-air contests. As in previous years, there would be a friendly bet. This time, Schnell would wager on the outcome with UK equipment maker and radio amateur W.W. Burnham. Schnell suggested the stakes would be a pair of green suspenders based on any challenge Burnham cared to name. They ended up betting a nice clock that at least 12 stations from Europe would be heard in North America. Recalling the QRM problem in the previous tests, Warner stressed the need for discipline during the upcoming round. He reminded everyone how embarrassing it had been when many stations, including some prominent ones, refused to stand by during the designated listening periods, leading to a failure to copy more than just a few European signals through the merciless interference caused by the morons in our midst. This year's test would concentrate on receiving before any two-way attempts. These tests are an international sporting event, repeated Warner, and the whole world is invited to participate, but in listening, not in sending, a tall order for hams eager to hit the key. One amateur taking the challenge particularly seriously was Leon Deloy, 8AB, who spent a month traveling in the U.S. attending the ARRL convention and visiting various American amateur radio stations in order to study them and prepare his own station, which he hoped would be one side of the first amateur two-way contact between Europe and North America. He knew of several other hams in France also building 1KW stations specifically for the tests and wanted to get an edge over his competitors. It will be more than a radio achievement. It will be one more tie of friendship between the two great nations which have been brought so close together by the late war, he wrote. Seeing the same level of enthusiasm in the U.S. as in France, Deloy also took note of the differences in amateur operations in the two countries. For one thing, the average amateur was much younger in the U.S. For another, on-air operation was more businesslike in that U.S. amateurs concentrated on message handling, which was not even allowed in France, whereas the French amateurs emphasized experimenting. Transmitters in the U.S. were often remotely controlled, but in France they were nearby where operators could get their hands on them, as an experimenter should. American amateurs optimized their receivers for ease of operation, useful in message handling, whereas in France they emphasized sensitivity and had receivers that were most of the time spread all over the table, wrote Deloy, which led to difficulties in adjustment and lower reliability, but I think we very nearly get the maximum sensitivity possible out of our sets, and most of us like far better to experiment with new hookups whenever we please than to sit night after night in front of the same nicely finished cabinet. He thought it quite a shame that Spark was still allowed in the U.S. It had been banned in France. The building, the traveling, the conversations, the research, a year or more of patient, painstaking preparation was all coming together in the fall of 1923. But the wait for the January transatlantic two-way tests proved to be too long for Monsieur Deloy. We'll continue this segment next week. Included in this material are quotes from the following. Kenneth B. Warner, Two-Way Tests with Europe, QST, March 1923, page 13. French work on 45 meters, radio communication by the amateurs, QST, October 1923, page 50. S. Cruz, Exploring 100 meters, QST, March 1923, page 12. Calls heard, QST, May 1923, page 75. F. H. Schnell, The Fourth Transatlantic Tests, QST, December 1923, page 9. Kenneth B. Warner, Achievement, Editorial, QST, January 1924, page 7. Kenneth B. Warner, Be a Sport, Editorial, QST, December 1923, page 7. Leon Deloy, My Impressions of American Amateur Radio, QST, December 1923, page 17. We tip our TWIAR cap to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for granting us the use of his website's materials. Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, as we prepared this segment. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The other day I saw a post by fellow amateur Gary, November 8 Delta Mike Tango, who mentioned an RF circulator and a Pluto SDR in the same sentence. Amplified by a response from a fellow Aussie electronics engineer, Ozeng, who helpfully added a link to a Wikipedia article about circulators, it finally twigged that I had such a gadget in my possession, and for the first time I realized how I might use it. Now, before I continue, I'll preface this with a disclaimer. This is a hand-wavy description of what this very interesting device does. Ozeng calls it absolute witchcraft, and that's an apt description if ever I've heard one. Imagine for a moment a radio with separate transmitter and receiver connectors, attached to the same antenna using a T-piece. As in, there's a run of coax coming from each connector joined together with a T-piece which in turn is connected to an antenna. The aim of this, don't do this at home contraption, is to avoid the need for two antennas. But, and it's a big one, doing this will very likely destroy your receiver the moment you transmit for the first time, because likely half the transmission will go to the antenna, while the other half makes its way to the receiver, which is not going to be something you want to happen, unless you like the smell of magic smoke. You might think that adding an attenuator, something that reduces the power on the receive port, would help. Well, yes, it would, but as a side effect it would also reduce the signal coming from the antenna. At that point you'll decide you need a switch. Initially, you might switch this manually, but that's a pain if you're wanting to transmit and receive continuously, and need to remember in which position the switch is in. The next step is to use an electronic switch, like a relay. It can trigger based on some signal from the radio when it's transmitting and turn off the receive path during a transmission. This raises an issue with delay. Do you trigger just before you hit the PTT, as in time travel, or do you delay the transmitter until after the relay has switched, which will cut off the beginning of your transmission? You'll likely have heard this kind of issue when listening to a station using an external amplifier. Their signal either jumps from low power to high power after they key up, or you miss the beginning of their call sign. Not to mention that if you get the delay wrong, you'll blow up the receiver. Fun for people watching, not so much for the equipment owner. Even if you get the timing right, you cannot transmit and receive at the same time. Of course, an obvious solution is to have two antennas, but soon you'll discover that when you're transmitting and receiving on the same frequency, even using two antennas, you'll have the exact same issues. It's why the local 10-metre repeater here in Perth, Victor Kilo 6 Romeo Hotel Foxtrot, has the transmitter in one location and a receiver 12 kilometres away, connected to each other via a 70-centimetre radio link. Other solutions in this space are cavity filters, duplexes and diplexes. These all require that the transmit and receive frequencies are different, and the equipment is generally tuned to a specific pair of frequencies. Physically, cavity filters can be massive, not to mention fragile. So, solving the issue of having a transmitter and receiver together on the same frequency is one that is challenging, to say the least. It's a common issue. Think about mobile phones, satellites, broadcast transmitters, and even your own amateur radio station. An RF circulator is a device that solves this in an extremely elegant way. For starters, it's a passive device, which means that you don't need to power it. There's no moving parts, no switches, no delays, no external controls. It's a box, generally with 3 sockets or ports, though versions exist with more. At a basic level, it works like this. A signal inserted into port 1 will only come out of port 2. Similarly, a signal into port 2 will only come out of port 3. And finally, a signal into port 3 will only come out of port 1. Think of it as a one-way roundabout. How is this useful, you might ask? I'll illustrate by plugging in 3 things. Connect port 1 to an antenna, port 2 to a receiver, and port 3 a transmitter. When you transmit into port 3, the signal only goes to the antenna, leaving the receiver safe and happy. Similarly, any antenna signal will only go to the receiver. So how does this work? Remember, hand wavy. Essentially, it's based on the idea that radio waves travelling in one direction combine and waves travelling in the opposite direction cancel. Different types of circulators achieve this in different ways, and come in different sizes as a result. The RF circulator I have is roughly 60 mm square, 30 mm thick, weighing in at most of half a kilogram, and as far as I know, intended for operation around 850 MHz. If I recall correctly, it came out of a CDMA mobile phone tower. The parameters that describe an RF circulator are the frequency range, the insertion loss, or how much signal gets lost getting from port 1 to port 2, the isolation, or how much signal leaks between port 1 and port 3, and a couple of others. Hopefully, I'll be able to use a Nano VNA or Pluto SDR to get a sense of what these values are and confirm the frequency range. Now, if that doesn't blow your mind, wait until I tell you about the 200-year history that accompanies it. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
The Radio Society of Great Britain is excitedly announcing the launch of the RSGB mobile app. This fantastic members benefit allows them to enjoy RADCOM, RADCOM Basics, and RADCOM Plus wherever they are. Complementing the RSGB's existing web app, with the new mobile app, users can save editions to read offline, bookmark articles to enjoy later, and have seamless access to extra digital content. With easy-to-use navigation, the app is the one-stop shop for RSGB publications. For our RSGB members tuned today, you can download it via the Apple app and Google Play stores, or go to rsgb.org for links.
The Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission will no longer require broadcast radio stations to renew their license as part of a rule it said it has adopted to help stations save money and shrink administrative burdens. The Commission said it was hoping the action would amount to a boost for terrestrial broadcasting, which, while facing challenges recently, nonetheless remains a vital source of news, information, and culture. A report on the Radio World website said that the open-ended licenses will replace those that presently have a maximum term of 7 years. The Commission will phase in the new licensing framework as the stations apply for their renewals. In a statement, the CRTC assured broadcasters that station monitoring would still be vigilant despite the switch to the open-ended licenses. Compliance reviews, which traditionally have occurred at the time of license renewal, will instead be conducted as needed.
The Georgia Tech Amateur Radio Club, W4AQL, hosted its largest ever amateur radio boot camp at the Hive Makerspace, welcoming more than 45 students for a full day of hands-on learning, presentations, and license testing on October 18th. With more details on the boot camp, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report.
The boot camp introduced Georgia Tech students to the fundamentals of amateur radio through interactive sessions on electronics, antennas, digital communications, and safety practices. Participants explored how radio connects science, engineering, and community service in an accessible and exciting way. And throughout the day, attendees took part in radio-themed Kahoot trivia challenges, talked with operators from local clubs, and learned how to continue their journey in amateur radio. The club also awarded 20 portable handheld radios to newly licensed students and winners of the Kahoot trivia to help them get on the air right away. Our goal was to make radio approachable and engaging, said Club Vice President Matthew Lyon, KN4MXH. We want every student who walks in curious to leave passionate, ready to explore, and grow in this hobby. The highlight of the day was a free FCC technician license testing program coordinated by the Atlanta VE team. Thanks to their dedication and smooth coordination, 44 students earned their amateur radio licenses, achieving an impressive 98% pass rate. Founded in 1912, the Georgia Tech Amateur Radio Club is one of the oldest collegiate amateur radio organizations in the country. The club continues to promote education, experimentation, and service through campus outreach and collaboration with the Atlanta radio community. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The success of the boot camp has set the foundation for a large-scale student training and licensing program in future semesters. W4AQL plans to continue offering hands-on learning opportunity, license upgrade sessions, and technical workshops that blend Georgia Tech's academic strengths with the practical side of amateur radio. Student-run boot camps don't just teach radio, they also build momentum for youth on the air, explained the club president, Audrey McElroy, KM4BUN. We hope that these and future attendees will become tomorrow's operators, Elmers, and net controllers.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. Are you in college or a university? If you have a ham station at the school, see if they have satellite equipment, because AMSAT is going to be starting back the college activity night. AMSAT will also be starting a youth net geared towards the younger crowd and led by some of our young satellite operators. Did you miss the AMSAT Symposium? It is available on YouTube on the AMSAT channel. Just do a search for 43rd AMSAT, and you will find Day 1, Day 2, and the annual general meeting. All of the talks were done by those volunteering their time. Whether it was the programming of the IHU, designing the placement of parts on one of the boards, building the boards and testing them, or designing something new for the satellites. This cannot be done without the volunteers. If you're interested in helping design and build the next generation of satellites, get in touch with us on our website, AMSAT.org. Click on Get Involved and then Volunteer for AMSAT. You never know where your talents fit in. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at solar weather and the terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity has decreased to very low levels. Region 4266 exhibited signs of slight development as it gained asymmetric penumbra surrounding its trailing spots. Meanwhile, Region 4267 underwent decay, losing several leading spots. Additional activity included a coronal mass ejection off the northeast limb on October 29th. An associated Type 2 radio sweep was reported with a coronal mass ejection. However, SUVI 195 imagery revealed the coronal mass ejection to have originated on the far side. Also, an approximate 12-degree filament eruption, centered near N27W24, was observed becoming unstable beginning October 29th. Most of the material of this event appeared to have been reabsorbed, with perhaps a faint and narrow coronal mass ejection escaping. Modeling of this event revealed a possible glancing blow to the north of Earth by late on November 2nd, but confidence is low in both the analysis of this event and the modeling outcome. Solar wind parameters continue to reflect positive polarity coronal hole high-speed stream influences. Solar wind parameters are expected to continue to reflect positive coronal hole high-speed stream influences through November 1st. It is very rare for the situation on the Sun and between it and Earth to be as relatively simple and clear as it has been in recent days. This is one of the reasons why it was possible to make a fairly accurate prediction of further developments. Although there were concerns that an intensified solar wind could hit Earth as early as October 26th, the original forecast ultimately proved accurate and the disturbance began on October 28th. The last weekend in October was thus marked by relatively good conditions for radio wave propagation on all shortwave bands. Regular helioseismological observations of the far side of the Sun are closely monitoring the only two currently active regions on the Sun. They will begin to emerge on the eastern edge of the solar disk in the first half of next week, which will immediately be reflected in an increase in solar flux. This may peak around November 10th, but it seems that it will happen sooner. The increase in solar activity during the usual favorable seasonal changes alone will result in improved conditions for shortwave propagation. With a little luck, the improvement could peak around November 8th, when the next increase in geomagnetic activity can be expected. Solar activity is expected to be at moderate levels until November 15th due to the return of Region 4246. Low levels are expected to prevail from November 14th through the 22nd as multiple regions depart the visible disk. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Luetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOCAP Online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, on November 1st, the IPARC contest, that's CW. November 1st and 2nd, the UKEIDX contest, that's single sideband and phone. On November 1st through the 3rd, it's the ARRL Sweepstakes Contest, CW. November 2nd, the IPARC Contest, single sideband, phone there. November 3rd, the RSGP 80-meter Autumn Series, that's data and digital. And on November 4th, the ARS Spartan Sprint, that's CW. November 5th, the UKE ICC 80-meter contest, that's phone. And on November 8th through the 9th, the ARRL EME contest, that's CW phone and digital. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on November 1st, the Stone Mountain Hamfest hosting the ARRL Georgia State Convention, that's in Lawrenceville, Georgia. On November 15th, the Superstition ARC Superfest and Electronics Expo hosting the ARRL Arizona State Convention. That's in Mesa, Arizona. And on December 12th and 13th, the Tampa Bay Hamfest hosting the ARRL West Central Florida Section Convention. That's in Plant City, Florida. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find more events in your area.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from All Over. And we start this week in Crimea, where a giant radio telescope in Crimea used in the past to support missions to Mars and Venus and attempt to contact alien civilizations has been destroyed in a drone attack. Ukrainian defense forces took down the 70-meter or 240-foot antenna dish to prevent Russian forces from using it to guide attacks on its territory. The RT-70 radio telescope has been under Russian control since the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. In late August, footage emerged captured by a drone slamming into the 50-year-old radio telescope. The drone, according to Defense Express, aimed at the 200-kilowatt transceiver at the heart of the telescope. The custom-made receiver produced in 2011 in Moscow during the last major upgrade of the telescope will be hard to replace, Defense Express said, meaning Russia will not likely be able to repair the antenna anytime soon. Next comes word that the Orion spacecraft for the Artemis II mission has been installed on its Space Launch System rocket as preparations for the circumlunar flight continue despite a government shutdown. Orion rolled over to the Vehicle Assembly Building late October 16th after completing work at another building at the center. That included having its launch abort system attached to the top of the capsule. At the Kennedy Space Center, where Artemis II launch preparations are taking place, 989 of the center's 2,075 civil servants are accepted from furloughs, although they are currently not being paid. Roughly 4,000 NASA employees, over 20% of the agency, have left in the past 6 months. Some were fired or retired early. Many took voluntary buyouts. In all cases, the root cause was the same: orders from on high to prepare for devastating budget cuts. And our final story, AMSAT is pleased to announce 2 new recipients of the prestigious Gridmaster Award. Jean-Pierre Plessis, KQ4DO, earned Gridmaster Award number 75 on October 6, 2025, and Dwight Fletcher, N1RCN, became recipient number 76 on the same date. The Gridmaster Award is presented to amateur radio operators who confirm all 488 Maidenhead grid squares in the continental United States via satellite, a milestone that requires years of persistence and dedication. This accomplishment highlights both the operating skill of the awardees and the vital role of portable operators who activate rare grids. Only a very small group of amateurs have achieved this distinction, making it one of the highest honors in satellite operating. Congratulations to Jean-Pierre and Dwight on their outstanding achievements.
The 20th anniversary ARRL online auction, sponsored by RT Systems Incorporated, went off without a hitch on October 10th through the 16th, 2025. The auction saw bidders vying for product review equipment, vintage books, mystery junk boxes from the ARRL lab, and more. 1,395 bids were recorded, with 12 items finishing in overtime bidding. The top 3 items with the most bids are as follows: 32 bids on the mystery duffel bag, 29 bids on the Kenwood SSB transceiver TS520, and 28 bids on one of the ARRL lab junk boxes. This year's ARRL online auction grossed more than $36,000. Proceeds from the yearly ARRL online auction support ARRL's education programs. We would like to express our sincere appreciation to RT Systems Incorporated and to members for your generous donations.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
The FCC has continued its actions against foreign-owned laboratories that test imported electronics for sale and use in the USA. Just days before the shutdown that affected much of the U.S. government, including the FCC, the Commission announced that the 4 laboratories, like the 11 the Commission denied in early September, were controlled by Chinese interests. That makes for a total of 15 such labs rejected so far by the FCC's Office of Engineering and Technology, as part of the administration's goal to give U.S.-owned companies the responsibility of certifying electronics for import and sale in the U.S. All approved equipment must demonstrate that it is not a threat to U.S. national security and must comply with FCC standards. This move is the latest following the Commission's adoption in May of the order. At the time the order was announced, the FCC disclosed that about 75% of all electronics sold in the U.S. are being tested by Chinese labs.
The log submission deadline for the first ever DX Marathon Sprint, which was held between October 18 to October 27, is November 2nd of 2025. Everyone is eligible to participate as there is no registration required. To upload your amateur data interchange format log, go to entry.dxmarathon.com. Those who participated in the CQ Worldwide Single Sideband Contest over the past weekend are perfect candidates to participate in the sprint. Everyone will receive a beautiful certificate that will highlight your accomplishment. The year-long DX Marathon program has been around for many years. If you wish to participate in the DX Marathon, you can submit ADIF files for contacts made throughout of all of 2025. You can continue to submit as many times as you wish throughout the end of the year. The deadline for the final 2025 DX Marathon log submission is January 6. For more information, contact Mark Wolschlegel, WC3W, at WC3W@DXMarathon.com.
Recognizing industry growth and student demand, a university in northern Washington state has developed a full electrical and computer engineering department on its campus, and it's being chaired by an amateur radio operator. Starting in the fall of 2026, students at Western Washington University will be able to enroll in programs in the new electrical and computer engineering department, and to pursue studies in the school's first engineering graduate program. The courses were previously housed within the school's Department of Engineering and Design. The Zero Retries newsletter, which reports the development in its latest edition, said that Janelle Leager, Dean of the College of Science and Engineering, credited student and industry demand as the primary reason for creation of a new department. She said the move is being made with support from the state to create the degree programs. Majors will select from 4 programs, which include wireless networking and signal processing focus, as well as AI, electronics, and energy. The professor chairing the new department is Andy Klein. On the university website, the professor writes that having a standalone department will pave the way to creating partnerships and internships with companies and generate more internships for students. Andy Klein is an amateur radio operator who received the call sign KG7WFT in July.
Imagine that you can buy a device for a few $100s and listen in on private conversations, military negotiations, and even intercept important commands for power systems around the world. This is not a scene from a spy movie, but harsh reality. The vulnerability was accidentally discovered by researchers from the University of California and the University of Maryland. For 3 years, they listened in on secret military and private communications. The result was astonishing. Almost half of all satellite transmissions were completely unencrypted. Analysis of the intercepted traffic showed that the following was transmitted over the open airwaves: private phone calls and SMS messages from T-Mobile customers, Wi-Fi data from airplanes, critical commands for managing power grids and oil platforms, military and police reports revealing troop locations and details of secret missions. This discovery completely destroys the myth of the safety and security of satellite communications. Governments and corporations rely on these systems, considering them to be reliably secure. In fact, the risks are much more serious than just a breach of confidentiality. This vulnerability can be used as a weapon to track troop movements, sabotage vital infrastructure, and steal data on a massive scale. The most disastrous aspect is that scientists analyzed only 15% of the total traffic, meaning that the actual scale of the problem could be much greater. This issue affects more than just the military and big business. Your personal calls, messages, and internet traffic on airplanes are often routed through satellites. If the connection is not encrypted, your data becomes accessible to anyone. Even worse, hackers can create fake base stations that mimic satellite signals and connect your phones to them without your knowledge. But the harsh reality is that the secret services probably could have known about this problem for years and actively exploited it. Without large-scale global efforts, vast amounts of our most sensitive data will continue to be made publicly available, remaining easy prey for those who want to intercept it.
2 Russian cosmonauts are back inside the International Space Station after conducting a spacewalk to install a semiconductor materials experiment, as well as retrieve and jettison a no longer needed camera from the exterior of the orbiting complex. Expedition 73 commander Sergei Ryzhikov and flight engineer Alexei Zabritsky, both with Russia's Federal Space Corporation, Roscosmos, marked the end of their first extravehicle activity together. Ryzhikov and Zabritsky installed the drum-shaped unit, ran power cables, and mounted a swappable cassette. The experiment is intended to demonstrate the ability to produce very thin materials, too thin to be made reliably on Earth, that can go from the microgravity environment of outer space to being used in semiconductors. Their primary task completed, Ryzhikov and Zabritsky then made their way to the Zvezda service module to remove and dispose of a high-definition television system that was originally a part of a Canadian commercial payload. Zabritsky then stood at the end of the European robotic arm and tossed the camera overboard toward the rear of the space station, ensuring it would not come back in contact with the outpost.
If you plan next year to attend the Radio Friedrichshafen in Germany, you may wish to set aside a day and do some sky gazing that has long been a companion to amateur radio. Astro, an astronomy trade fair, is making its premiere next year. The Exhibition Center will be home to the Large Ham Radio Trade Fair from June 26th through the 28th and will be welcoming amateur astronomers and technology hobbyists on June 27. Space is being set aside in Hall B1 for a trade fair focusing on astronomy, astrophotography, and related activities, giving hams and others many more worlds to explore.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
And our final story this week will attempt to answer the question, is AMSAT Oscar 7 or AO7 still the oldest amateur radio satellite in orbit? AMSAT Oscar 7 or AO7 is the second Phase 2 amateur radio satellite constructed by the Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation, or AMSAT. It was launched into low Earth orbit on November 15, 1974, and remained operational until a battery failure in 1981. After 21 years of apparent silence, the satellite was heard again on June 21, 2002, 27 years after launch, and it continues to be used by amateurs daily even now. For a couple of decades, AMSAT has been able to proudly boast that this bird is the oldest operating satellite in space. However, that record has been challenged. After 47 years of silence, LES-1, a satellite launched by the U.S. Air Force and MIT's Lincoln Laboratory in 1965, began transmitting again. Its signals were detected by Phil Williams, G3YPQ, from North Cornwall in southwest England on December 18, 2012, verified by other members of the Hearst Group, Flavio A.B. Arcangelo, PY2ZX, in Brazil on December 22, 2012, and Mathis Bopp, DD1US, in Germany on December 27, 2012. In 1963, NASA's Lincoln Laboratory embarked on a groundbreaking mission to build and demonstrate military space communication systems under Project West Ford. This effort led to the development of the Lincoln Experimental Satellites, a series of satellites designed to test high-frequency communication capabilities in space. LES-1 launched on February 11, 1965, and was the first of these satellites. While LES-1 had ambitious goals, its operational success was limited. LES-1 was supposed to achieve a series of technical milestones, including demonstrating the viability of super high-frequency communications in orbit. However, due to miswiring in its ordnance circuitry, the satellite never achieved its attendant orbit, and its communication system ceased operation by 1967. According to Williams, LES-1 was determined to be tumbling with a rotation rate of once every 4 seconds, as determined by distinctive fading of the signals, causing its solar panels to intermittently block and unblock the satellite's power source. It is possible that after 47 years, the batteries failed in a manner that allows them to carry charge directly through to the transmitter on 237 megahertz, allowing the satellite to resume transmissions when it is in sunlight. The satellite continues to be operational as tracked by the SatNOGS network. The return of LES-1 after being lost in space for so many years presented a fascinating challenge for scientists. The satellite, now referred to as a zombie satellite, had somehow come back to life, despite decades of dormancy. This sparked curiosity within the scientific community, and a team from Lincoln Laboratory, where LES-1 was originally developed, set up a system to track and record the satellite every time it passed over their campus. The question remains, what caused this satellite to come back to life? The most plausible explanation centers around an electrical anomaly. This short could have allowed the satellite's solar panels, which had been inactive for years, to provide enough power to reactivate its communication system. While this explanation remains speculative, it highlights how even outdated technology can sometimes defy expectations under the right conditions. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the exact cause of LES-1's revival, the event is still a testament to the resilience of space technology. LES-1's unexpected resurgence provides a valuable link to the past and offers insights into the evolution of satellite communications.
This Week in Amateur Radio is streamed on the internet, broadcast on low-power FM, and heard on nets and repeaters all around the world, like the K2IWR repeater operated by the Skyline Amateur Radio Club on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, where This Week in Amateur Radio is heard each Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to have your club's repeater announced on This Week in Amateur Radio, send us an email with all the pertinent information to w2xbs77@gmail.com. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.